Hey folks, Malforian here, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at Millennia's latest dev diary. This is covering how combat is going to work in the game. It works a little bit different to most 4X games that I've seen, which does make sense as everything we've seen so far is like that 4X base kind of gameplay you see everywhere else, with a bit of a twist on it with like ages and all that good stuff that we've seen so far. Today it's going to cover the basics of combat, how like the regions you fight in work, and then also how leaders are going to work in the game. Some interesting mechanics around how that's going to work. So there's plenty to keep us busy, so hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, if you're following Millennia, you're looking forward to the game coming out. I'm covering all the dev diaries up to launch. But on that note, we're just going to get straight into it, and the first thing they're going to do is talk about the goals of combat in the game, what they're wanting to see from how combat works in the kind of day-to-day progress of the ages through the game. And as they start here, they want Millennia's combat to be in line. There's a lot of strategy games with tactical combat that they love, like Age of Wonders. Millennia is primarily about the arc of history, and our goal is to keep the focus at that level. They want you to be thinking about your technologies, government type, growth of cities, and of course wars. Less about that archer should take cover behind that tree. Not really along the lines of, if you played like Humankind recently, that is where the combat is like an integral part of the game. You've really got to think about where you go into fights, because then you zoom into that hex grid and then you're fighting on the actual world map. So there's a lot more of like, oh, I need to be in this position on a hill. But in this, it's going to be a lot more like Civ, as in you have to obviously worry about your army, but you don't need to think about it too much, really. You don't have to worry about where you're fighting to the extent you do in other 4X or grand strategy games. To support this, the combat choices in Millennia are at the strategic level. You decide who fights who, where and when, but you do not give orders during combat. You know, it's not like Total War in that you actually play out the combat. Combat is presented in a window atop the world map and provides controls that allow you to analyze and quickly resolve a battle as you want, which we've seen before. I think in the first dev diary, they showed like the battle screen, and they're going to show that again during this dev diary. This is intended to show combat while still keeping you in the flow of the game as much as possible. You're not loading into other parts of the game. There's not big UI changes. It's going to be basically like a pop-up, and it's going to show you what happened. And as I say, they will get to that during the dev diary today. Secondly, they want the combat to be manageable. In the early stages of 4X, you tend to have a small number of units. These are important, easy to keep track of, and often you have a specific plan for each one of them. Contrast this with not so uncommon mid to late game conditions where you have lots of units, you spend a good chunk of your time basically moving them around, thinking where you're going to move your unit, and you know, you spend more time kind of thinking and planning rather than actually like playing the game at the end of the day. Again, not always to go back to Civilization, but if you're like me, I enjoy the early game in Civ where you have less units, it's all about exploration. You're kind of just kind of on the fly making decisions. And then once you get bogged down at the end of it, I don't like the game as much. I find it a lot less fun. So it'd be interesting to see exactly how this plays out in Millennia rather than those traditional 4X games. And then continuing on from that, they basically want the game to feel like that early game feel you see in other games, but during the entire kind of span of the game. So you're always just couple of units, an army, not strategic as they said, but you're kind of just quickly making decisions rather than getting bogged down in moving like 50 units around the map. And then some of the ways they've accomplished this is through core game balance and UI support, like the Outliner. If you've played any Paradox game, you've seen the Outliner. It basically looks exactly the same in here as it does in many other of their games. Or the ability to name armies. I think everyone likes the ability to name an army, give it a cool name, and then you can kind of follow that army's history during the course of the game. I always like that feature. I always like it in Civilization 6, where you can name specific units when you promote them, and then you kind of follow their history. And if they die, it's only a name. It does feel worse when like a named unit dies versus just, oh, it's Archer number 5, when it's like the heroes of the Acropolis or something. You're like, oh yeah, those guys, I remember what they did at the beginning of the game for me. But the biggest contributor is having combat built around multiple unit armies. So as we'll see in this screenshot here, you have these armies, and then those armies have certain like units in there. You can basically combine a bunch of units into one army, and then that one army is what you actually control. As you can see in this screenshot, they've got this 21st army. They've just got one called Combat, which has some archers, horsemen, and I guess these are like rangers or something. And then obviously, as you can see here, a couple of different ones, and a fishing navy. I like a fishing navy. So I do actually like this idea of having, really, to be honest, like a few less units, but then also they're in these armies. So as you can see from the example here, they've basically got 6 armies instead of what, like 15 or 20 units that you'd have to move around. As they mentioned, it's a bit easier just to move 6 units around, and what, 1, 2, 3 of these are garrisons, or at least they're called garrisons, so I would presume they are garrisoned in a city maybe or something, or in a region along those lines. And then they've got a patrol one here, a combat team, and then a 21st army. Maybe that's just a little exploration army or something like that. And you can name them, and then at a quick glance, you can see, oh, that's my scout army, that's my defensive army, that's my fast attack army or something like that. And then you've got all the units in there, and it's a little bit less micromanagey. Army sizes can start at 3, but can grow up to 7 later in the game. Oh, so they are limited. I guess this is like mid-game, because there's one with 4 here. So yeah, they start with 3, can go up to 7. Larger numbers of units are thus grouped into a smaller number of armies to command, plan around, and keep track of, as we mentioned before. Finally, like almost everything, our goal is to have some interesting choices at the heart of gameplay. We like making combat in line and not having tactical choices during the fighting, but we do want solid strategic choices about who is fighting. Armies are a good structure for focused decisions around warfare, but there need to be interesting decisions about how your army is built for it to be worthwhile. You know, they can't just group armies together and say, hey, this is a totally new system. Look, you have armies instead of units. Isn't it great? And players would just be like, well, yeah, but it's just your units are in armies, so it's not that crazy. But we are going to get into how it is a little bit different now, and that is the basics of combat. And as we've said, here's the screenshot of like how the battles take place, basically. We saw that before, but they are actually going to give us some information about what this means. Battles in Millennia are generally structured around one army fighting another army. The fighting is resolved during 3 rounds of combat. All the units in each army get to take an action during each round. If an attacker wins the fight, their army moves into the space that was occupied by their target, and the defender, assuming any of them are still around, retreats. If there is no winner after 3 rounds, the battle is considered a push, and both armies remain in their original locations. And as we see from the screenshot here, there's the 3 militia from the Roman raiders, as they mentioned, and then the army that is attacking them, which is Egypt. They are, you know, a lot more better equipped. They've got a lot better units. They've got 5 units there versus the 3 raiders. And then that's going to make 14 turns by the looks of it. And I imagine if you press the play button, it just plays out the fight, basically, and you kind of watch. But it does look like, as well, from this, you can actually go back by 1 step, or I guess all the way back to the beginning, and re-watch it. And then, obviously, when the result happens, you'll then go back to the map. During a round of combat, 1 unit in an army will attack an enemy unit. This causes the attacking unit's attack value to be compared to the defense value. From the result, damage is determined and applied to the target unit's health and organization. I guess the defending unit also damages the attacking one though, but from how it's written, it only says apply to the target unit's health and organization, but it must also like counterattack. Like if there's some swordsman attacking another swordsman, it must surely give you damage to the attacking unit as well, unless they're just so overpowered they don't take any damage. But from how it's written there, it sounds like only the attacking unit does damage. I'd be surprised if that is the case, but it could be. Health is something of a normalized value. Every unit, for the most part, is going to have 50 health. So it's standardized health levels, but obviously the damage will scale to different, you know, levels to take that down quicker or slower. It does say not all, so I imagine some units will have more health, you know, maybe tanks or elephants in the early game or something will have additional health to make them a little bit more tankier. Organization is somewhat related to health. It is a different factor, and different units have different organization values despite having the same level of health. So I guess this is how they're going to allow you to kind of specialize those units. At 0 or less health, a unit is destroyed. At 0 or less organization, a unit is routed and attempts to flee. Damage to health is recovered over several turns from basically healing up in your own territory or in your outposts, as they mentioned last week during the Nation's Dev Diary. Damage to organization is fully recovered at the start of the next turn. I'm not too sure about that. Like, so organization is basically your morale. I'm not sure about it fully recovering on the next turn of combat. I would have thought it would stay lower, and maybe you could have some kind of trait, or the leaders that they're going to talk about later could boost the morale so it does recover fully. I think having it fully recover at the start of every turn is, I don't know, I think it should either slowly recover or certain units will fully recover, like maybe a legionary or something, because of their like training and stuff would fully recover, but maybe if it's just a scout or a warrior, it like half recovers or something like that. I'm not sure about it fully recovering. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Additional factors such as terrain where the fight takes place or an army being fortified can further modify combat, but this is the basic way of how it works. And as you can see here, defense adjustment +0, terrain modifier +0. They're just fighting on a plains here. I would imagine if they're attacking into like mountains or hills or forests, you're going to get some kind of defensive bonus. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case. Unit types inject interesting gameplay into the core mechanics by adjusting various rules of the combat system. With all the variant ages, crisis ages, national spirits, and upgrades through the ages, there are close to 250 units. That's a lot of units, a lot of variety, especially with these armies, because you can obviously compile them in different ways, so there's going to be a lot of variety by the sounds of it. While many of these have unique characteristics, almost all of them have 3 basic types, and the types define basically how they work. Support types like archers. This does a lot of damage, but they need protection. They're basically going to get wiped out if they're caught off guard or something like that. These units also go first in each round of combat, and they select their target at random. If you believe in luck, you can run all support type armies and hope your initial attack is enough to cripple the enemy army. Okay, that's an interesting mechanic. You could just, as it says, just be like the English or something, I guess. Like, historically had a lot of archers, and just go, okay, this army is full of archers, kill them, because if you don't, you're 100% dying. So it would be an interesting way to play through the game. Just building your armies around supports and seeing if you could survive long enough. I imagine it's pretty difficult, but it would be interesting to see how that played out. Line type units are supposed to protect the support types. Line types are units like spearmen in the early game, pike, musket, and then assault rifles in the later ages. Line units tend to do less damage, but have strong defense and organization. So it sounds like they're tanks if you play, RPGs or something. They're the units that are there to soak up damage more than actually do damage themselves. It's more about keeping your defense good, and then, as it says, also the organization. So I guess because they're defending the support troops take less organization damage, so they're more efficient. Line units go second in each round of combat from a targeting perspective. If there are line units that are valid targets, they must be attacked before other units can be engaged, but when there are multiple valid targets, line types select one at random to attack. Hence, stacking line units in an army is a good way to keep your damage-dealing supports alive. So yeah, they're basically like the first line of defense. Have all your damage behind them. They can obviously do all the damage, and then your front line units are soaking up the damage to allow them to do that. Mobile type units represent maneuver warfare. These are units like knights or battle tanks. These are intended to make a mess of things by showing up in places where the enemy doesn't want to see them, so those kind of like pincer movements around the side, I would imagine. Mobile types go last in each round of combat. If there are enemy line units present, the mobile units must attack these first, but representing their ability to strike at enemy weaker units. Mobile types don't select at random, instead they will always attack the unit with lowest health. Additionally, mobile troops do double the normal damage to enemy organization, representing the cavalry charges or shock tactics. Mobile type units are useful for breaking enemy line defenders and then chasing down the supports they might be protecting. So it's definitely going to be an interesting way of like how you build your armies. These mobile types sound like the best kind of units if you can support how well they're going to do. Now, they're not, I think, like present in your line of defense. So as they mentioned with the support types, you couldn't have an army of just these because I think they just die basically. They're all about that lightning attack, doing crazy amounts of damage and damage to their morale, trying to break those units, and then your other main units can kind of finish them off or soak up damage and have these kind of pick them off as well. So I think the balance between mobile types and support types is going to be where the main strategy is. I think you're always going to want that like line troop tanking stuff. And then it's going to be the balance of, do you want kind of stationary support, high damage, or do you want these mobile types that can do really good damage, lower morale, and they do pick off the lowest health target. So they are going to be good at picking off those units you've almost killed, and they're doing double damage. They're focusing on the lowest health, and then you can deal with everyone else afterwards. And then next, they're going to go into Warfare Domain. Combat as part of a 4X generally involves considerations beyond just fighting and the composition of armies. Economic factors play a part too. The traditional considerations that flow from this structure, like unit production and upkeep costs, are part of Millennia's combat system. Similar to the way these types of rules introduce an additional dimension to how you think about your armies, the domains of Millennia create another dimension for the economic interaction with warfare beyond the typical material. So again, this system's going to have a bit of a twist on it compared to other games. To begin with, not all units of Millennia are built at the capital with production. There are a number of domain powers that can be used to spawn units or armies. For example, the starting tribal government includes Raised Tribal Army, which allows you to spawn a warband at a capital using your government domain. Okay, so that's a cool feature. Raised Tribal Army or spawn a settler, and that is costing you the points that they talked about last week. But yeah, you can spawn basically a whole tribal army and, go crazy with it. Try to get some early gains and things like that. You're not having to build the units yourself. You're using government domain to basically spawn one and then try and make some gains out of it. And is that a better investment than spawning a settler or some other use you could have had for that domain? You can use it on trying to get some expansion through an army. Or maybe you've just been caught off guard, you've not planned well, someone comes up and starts attacking you, you can just spawn an army really quick and have that defensive unit kind of ready to go. An interesting way of doing it. It's not just building them in a city like you usually would. You have these different ways to spawn different units. Units that are a part of a particular nation spirit often have ways to earn or deploy these units that are not in standard with build them with production. This allows a variety of economic plans and national spirit combinations that can produce unique approaches to war. The warfare domain itself has a number of national spirits that are focused on war, as you might imagine, like the Spartan one that we've seen. Although I think they've renamed that, so it's no longer called Spartan Tactics. I think it has another name now. But even the basic warfare domain powers that all nations have access to influence combat heavily. Warfare domain powers like force march or reinforcements can be used to get armies or whatever composition where you want them to be or to heal them after a fight. These uses also compete with upgrading older units to more modern ones and more powerful versions when you advance through ages, which has a warfare domain cost. So this is where I think the combat is going to be so varied during different playthroughs. Even as I mentioned, I think last week, you could play the same nation in this game, and it sounds like you could have like totally different campaigns just from all the other systems we've seen, but then also this combat system. If you're plugging in these different national spirits, these different domain powers, you're going to be playing your warfare game pretty differently depending on which ones you choose. And obviously the different ages that you go through has different army types that you wouldn't get in other ones. Like I think you can get like plague doctors and things like that if you're in the age of plague. It is going to play out very differently, I would think. Anyway, it sounds like that's the case. As I mentioned above, what, 250 units? There's going to be a lot of variety. Well, hopefully it doesn't descend into, yeah, but here's the 6 army composition you should always use and always do this. I hope it does keep that variety because it would be pretty interesting to have a game that has such a varied kind of composition of army types. I would imagine it's going to be a nightmare to balance, so hopefully they can get on top of that. But as we've seen here, this is the 5th army. Upgrade to a modern machine gun for 50 XP. And these are obviously different things you can get for that. Get with the times, yeah. Get rid of that rubbish gun you've got there. Get a modern machine gun, my friend. You're going to do much better. In general, a reserve or warfare domain represents a nation's overall preparation for war. If you're going to be fighting, you want to have some warfare domain in the bank to use domain powers, upgrade units, and make the most of your national spirits. So that's where you're going to be wanting to plan for wars or plan for someone might declare war on you. If you're spending all this domain on other things and, you know, you're just generally upgrading things, you don't have it stockpiled, if you get attacked out of nowhere, you're going to be in trouble by the sounds of it. So again, kind of another way of kind of balancing out how warfare is going to work. And then we're on to leaders. I think this is the last section. There are several sources of leaders in Millennia, but the basic way to get one is through your own promotion. As units fight in Millennia, they gain experience, which eventually translate into levels of veterancy. Each level of veterancy increases the attack and defense, but veterancy also allows a unit to be promoted into a leader at the cost of warfare domain. Leaders are reasonably capable units on their own, but their true value is from the bonuses they apply to other units in that army. So this is why you're going to want to have different armies with different leaders in there. And I guess specialize those armies to whatever bonus that leader is providing, so you can kind of get the maximum out of them. Leaders have a tactics value. When combat occurs, leaders with the highest tactic value on each side, you generally do not want more than one leader in an army. So again, makes sense to split these out into your other armies. Are compared, and the difference between their scores becomes a bonus for the side with a higher tactics leader. So I think base, it just gives you a bonus to your attack. Each level of the tactics bonus is essentially an additional level of veterancy for all units in your army, so good leaders can provide a considerable advantage. Leaders start with a tactics value depending on the corresponding age the unit was promoted. An age 1 warband will promote into a 1 tactics leader, while an age 2 spear will promote into a 2 tactics leader. Gaining levels of veterancy will also further increase their value. Hence, the total potential tactics value of a leader caps out at maximum veterancy, which means that units from later ages promoted into leaders will always have the higher maximum tactics level than leaders from an earlier age. Once a unit has been promoted into a leader, it can no longer be upgraded, which generally means it becomes outclassed over time. When leaders get a little long in the tooth, a unit ability can be used to retire the leader, which provides a warfare domain reward. So yeah, you basically say, look, thanks chap, you've been really good. Agamemnon here, he's been leading the 4th army, but look, your time is done. You've got swords, you've got helmets, but this army's got tanks, and tanks are better than swords and helmets. So I think it's time for you to go to the farm. And as it says here, Agamemnon, not known for having commanded main battle tanks, and in this game, he's still not gonna. Overall, this means leaders are very powerful in their age, but the spirit of what they did can live on into other ages, but generally you don't want a leader you had in the Stone Age kick around till the end of the game. I really like this. I like having the idea of, yeah, Agamemnon, hero of the Bronze Age, it wouldn't make sense for him to still be alive at the end of the game, commanding tanks, commanding planes or something, warships or something along those lines. I think it's cool, this system of, look, they generally become outdated, and then you retire them, you get a bonus to your military domain, and then you can use that to do something else. So it's not a total waste. You got use of him during his life, basically, but then after that, he's still giving you a bonus to your domain, and you can use that on different warfare things. So it's definitely not just have a unit that's in charge of this army, does a bit more damage, or doesn't do damage, it only buffs or something along those lines. It actually fights, it does buff every other unit in there, especially if they're a good leader, and then you can't promote them, and you've got to retire them. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, but I like the idea of retiring them and saying goodbye to heroes, because new ones are going to be coming in the future ages. But with that, that's the end of the Combat Dev Diary. They do mention here that this is kind of the first overall look at combat. They've covered basically how the different systems work, but it hasn't been like a deep dive into exactly how certain things work. Some of the things have only been covered very lightly. I think they did a good way of explaining it. I think before we weren't really sure how combat was going to work. Was it going to work like Civ? Was it going to work like something like Crusader Kings? But I think from the screenshots we saw, it wasn't exactly showing how combat was going to work. And I think we've got a pretty good idea now how these kind of army system, the leader system, how your national spirits, economy, and leaders are basically going to kind of form your armies in each playthrough, and how they're going to play through a little bit differently. And as they mentioned here, that's going to give you a lot of options for crafting fun approaches to fighting. You shouldn't be getting bogged down into micromanaging loads of units. You can have these army blocks, and you're going to be moving them around the board rather than wasting your time moving specific units. But with that being said, that's the end of the Dev Diary. They do say here on the 14th of November, they're going to talk for the first time about economy. It is only part one of this, so it looks like we're going to get quite a detailed breakdown of economy over at least 2 different Dev Diaries. So that will be interesting. We haven't exactly seen how the economy works. They have talked about how there's the layered system, so you can use wood to just make buildings or something, but you can also make wood into planks, then planks into paper, and then paper into research. We're going to get a lot more information about that in 2 weeks, and then again 2 weeks after that. But anyway, we're going to leave it there for today. If you've made it to this part of the video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. As I said at the beginning, I'm covering Millennia up to launch, and then we're obviously going to be playing on the channel. So if you've been enjoying that, or if you enjoy historical grand strategy games in general, that is what I cover on the channel, so make sure to subscribe. But that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.